The gym at Naval Training Base buzzed with noise that morning. Music thumped, weights clanged, and recruits traded cocky jokes between sets. They were young, hungry, and arrogant, the kind of energy that came from believing they already knew what toughness looked like. Then the door swung open. A woman stepped inside, head high, carrying a gym bag and a quiet presence that didn't seem to fit the place. She wasn't in uniform, just in plain workout gear, her hair tied neatly back, her expression unreadable. Some heads turned immediately. "New face," one of the guys muttered to his friend, smirking. "Probably admin or medic. You can tell too clean, too calm." The woman didn't respond. She simply placed her bag down and began stretching methodically like someone used to routines drilled by habit, not vanity. Every motion was precise, controlled. Another recruit, a tall one named Miller, laughed quietly. "Let's see if she can keep up with the warm-ups," he joked, lifting a dumbbell heavier than necessary just to prove a point. The group chuckled, not out of cruelty but out of ignorance. They had no idea who they were talking about. She ignored them completely. Minutes later, she moved to the treadmill, started running at a steady, brutal pace. The digital numbers flashed higher and higher until even Miller's grin faded. She ran like she wasn't testing herself. She was remembering something. After 20 minutes, she stepped off, breathing steady, not a trace of exhaustion in her eyes. She walked to the showers, towel over her shoulder. The recruits watched, curiosity eating at their earlier mockery. "Bet she's never even held a rifle," one whispered. Another added, "Pretty face like that doesn't belong here." The laughter was low but unmistakable. Inside the locker room, steam filled the air. The woman, still silent, grabbed her towel, wrapped it loosely, and walked past them toward her locker. They were still talking, still whispering. One bumped into her, pretending it was accidental. That's when it happened. The towel slipped. It hit the floor with a soft thud, and everything stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then they saw it, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light, swinging lightly against her collarbone. Dog tags. Scratched, aged, unmistakably real. The room fell silent as she calmly bent, picked up her towel in it. Not embarrassed, not angry, just composed, like she'd been through far worse than judgmental stares. One of the recruits squinted, trying to read the engraved letters. His lips parted as he whispered the name aloud. "SEAL Team 6. The name spread like a current through the room. The laughter died instantly. Eyes widened. Someone dropped his water bottle. They had heard that name before. The only woman to ever lead a SEAL covert recovery mission deep in hostile territory. A story half-whispered in military circles, often dismissed as rumor because no one ever confirmed it. Until now. Stood there unflinching, towel secure again. She looked around the room, at the same men who had mocked her moments ago. "You were saying something about endurance," she asked, her tone calm but sharp enough to slice through shame. No one answered, not a sound. Her eyes lingered briefly on Miller, who had been the loudest of all. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence did the work for her. Then she simply nodded once, picked up her gym bag, and walked out the door, leaving behind a room full of soldiers who suddenly didn't feel as tough as they thought. As she disappeared down the hallway, someone finally whispered, "That's the commander they talked about in Norfolk, the one who led that extraction in 2019. Miller stared after her, swallowing hard. The steam in the locker room felt heavier now, thick not with heat, but with realization. The woman they dismissed as fragile had seen more than they ever would. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here with purpose. That night no one joked in the barracks. The recruits were unusually quiet, each thinking about the same thing, the way she looked at them, not with anger but with disappointment. And as lights dimmed across the base, Miller couldn't shake her words from his mind. Just 6 of them, quiet but powerful. "You were saying something about endurance." He didn't know it yet, But that moment, those few seconds in the locker room, would mark the beginning of a transformation none of them could have imagined. Because that's how legends walk in, not with a roar but with silence that makes everyone else stop talking. By sunrise, word had already spread through every hallway on base. Commander, the woman in the towel story, wasn't a rumor anymore. When the recruits assembled for morning drills, whispers floated through the ranks like sparks on dry grass. She's a SEAL. That can't be true. Maybe she just trained with them. Nobody wanted to believe it, but when appeared in full uniform, eyes cold and unreadable, doubt vanished. She stood in front of them, hands behind her back, voice calm but commanding. "From today, I'm overseeing your endurance and leadership training," she said. "You'll address me as commander. Understood?" A dozen voices shouted back in unison, "Yes, commander." But their tone wasn't respect yet. It was curiosity laced with fear. Studied their faces. She saw arrogance in their posture, comfort in their routines. She'd seen that look before, in men who thought strength came from muscles, not mindset. She planned to break that illusion fast. "Warm up," she ordered. The recruits dropped to the ground and began push-ups, paced between them silently. Her boots struck the concrete with rhythm, one that made their nerves tick louder with every step. Miller, still sore from yesterday's embarrassment, tried to lead the count, hopping to prove himself. 1, 2, 3, he barked. Stopped near him. "You call that cadence, recruit?" He stammered, "Ma'am, commander, just warming up." She crouched down to his level, her voice low enough for everyone to hear. "You warm up to prepare your body. You train to prepare your mind. Right now, I see neither." Then, without another word, she joined them, dropping to the ground and matching their pace. But her form perfect, her breathing steady. The recruits exchanged nervous glances as she passed their count without struggle. At 50, most of them began trembling. At 70, 2 gave up. By 100 was still going strong, not even sweating. Finally she stood, clapped once and said, "Lesson 1, never underestimate quiet." They didn't laugh this time. After drills came the run, 5 miles across sand dunes that burned under the morning sun. Led from the front, her boots sinking into the grit. No shortcuts, no rests. When one recruit began lagging, she turned her head slightly and said, "You fall behind, you stay behind." It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. By mile 4, Miller's lungs burned. He pushed harder, determined not to be the one who gave up. Sweat poured down his face and his vision blurred. When he finally stumbled, stopped instantly, ran back and grabbed his arm. "Up," she said sharply. "I can't." "You can. You're not hurt, you're scared of failing, big difference." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was surgical, cutting through his excuses. With her help, he straightened and stumbled forward, finishing beside her. When they crossed the line, he collapsed to his knees, panting hard. She stood above him, arms crossed. "That's what leadership looks like," she said quietly. "Not perfection, persistence." The words struck something deep inside every recruit. They'd been led by men who shouted, cursed, and bullied. But this woman, this commander, they realized, didn't need to raise her voice to command respect. She walked away without waiting for thanks. By afternoon, the base cafeteria buzzed with conversations again, but this time the tone had changed. There were no jokes, no snide remarks, just awe. "You see the way she runs," one said. "She's not human," another muttered. Miller, still nursing his sore muscles, said nothing. He just stared at his tray, hearing her words repeat in his mind. "You're not hurt, you're scared of failing." That night, while most recruits fell into exhausted sleep, sat alone in her quarters. The dim light from her desk lamp reflected off a framed photo, a team of SEALs standing in desert gear, one of them smiling faintly, her. She traced a finger over the image, stopping at 2 faces blurred by dust and memory. They weren't just comrades, they were ghosts. Her eyes hardened again. Tomorrow would be harder for them because she wasn't there to teach exercise. She was there to teach survival. Outside, the wind howled across the training grounds, rattling metal signs and loose chains. In the barracks, Miller lay awake, still sore but strangely proud. He'd seen something in her eyes today, pain, purpose, maybe both. He didn't know her story yet. None of them did. But one thing was certain. Commander wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to turn them into something they weren't ready to become. And for the first time since training began, not one recruit dared underestimate her again. The next morning came with a sky painted gray. Clouds hung low, heavy with the kind of silence that made soldiers uneasy. Commander stood before her recruits at dawn, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "Today," she said, "we stop pretending." No one knew exactly what she meant, but her tone carried the weight of a challenge. The men fell in line, boots thudding against the damp earth. The air smelled of salt and discipline. His voice echoed through the field. "You all think toughness is about pushing weight or shouting louder. It is. It's about breaking and still moving forward." They started the day with a combat obstacle course, the most brutal yet. Barbed wire, rope climbs, crawling through mud thick enough to pull boots off. Didn't just supervise, she ran beside them. When one recruit fell into the mud and cursed under his breath, stopped. "Watch your language, recruit. The dirt doesn't care who you are." By the third lap, the group was exhausted. Sweat mixed with rain as thunder rumbled over the ocean in the distance. One man slipped during a climb and hit the ground hard. The others hesitated, unsure whether to help or finish. Didn't shout, she waited. Miller was the first to move. He turned back, grabbed the fallen recruit and hauled him up, gave a single approving nod. "That," she said, "is leadership." They carried on, their teamwork improving with every stumble. Could see it, the shift. The arrogance was fatting. In its place, grit began to grow. After hours of drills, they collapsed in the training yard, gasping for air. Stood over them, hands behind her back, eyes scanning the faces streaked with dirt and sweat. "You think this is pain," she said, her tone steady. "Pain is when you've given everything and the mission still goes wrong. Pain is when someone doesn't come home. What you feel right now, this is training. Be grateful for it." The words hung heavy in the air. Miller, lying on his back, looked up at her. For a moment, he wanted to ask what she'd seen out there, what mission had carved that steel into her voice, but he didn't. She didn't seem like someone who told war stories for glory. Later that afternoon, during weapons assembly, one recruit complained, "Ma'am, my hands are bleeding." Walked over, inspected his palms, raw, blistered, streaked with red. She looked him in the eye. "Good. That means you're learning something." The room went silent. She handed him a rag. "Wipe it, finish the job." By the end of the day, something had changed. The recruits weren't just following orders anymore. They were watching her closely, mirroring her movements, studying her quiet confidence. As the sun set, painting the base gold and crimson, called them into formation. "You all have potential," she said, "but potential means nothing without purpose. So tonight, I want each of you to write one sentence. Why are you here? What are you willing to lose to finish this?" It wasn't the kind of task they expected. No yelling, no punishment, just reflection. That night in the barracks, the recruits sat in silence, pencils scratching on paper. Miller stared at his blank sheet for nearly an hour before finally writing. "To prove I can be more than I was yesterday." He folded it, placed it under his pillow, and lay awake listening to the rain outside. Meanwhile, in her office, poured herself a cup of coffee, her own sheet of paper sitting untouched. Her fingers traced the edge of her mug as if she were debating whether to write anything at all. Finally, she sighed, picked up the pen and wrote a single line. "To make sure no one else dies because I wasn't ready." She stared at the words for a long moment before folding the paper and sliding it into her pocket. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky. The base slept uneasily, unaware that tomorrow would bring the toughest test yet, one that would blur the line between simulation and survival. And for the first time since she arrived, Commander allowed herself a faint smile. Her recruits were beginning to change. And so perhaps was she. The next morning the recruits woke to a blaring siren. The clock read 400 hours. No briefing, no warning, just voice echoing over the loudspeaker. Uniforms, gear, formation in 5. Groans rippled through the barracks, but fear silenced them quickly. Within minutes, they stood outside in the freezing dawn. The wind from the Pacific whipped across their faces. Stood waiting, perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "Today," she said, "you'll learn about chaos." Miller blinked, half awake. "Ma'am, what kind of exercise is this?" His eyes met his, the kind that doesn't tell you when it ends. Before anyone could respond, she blew the whistle. It began with a sprint full gear across the wet sand. Then came crawling, rolling, climbing through ropes slick with. The temperature dropped. Rain started to fall. Every breath turned sharp in their lungs. Hours passed with no break. Didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her silence cut deeper than any order. When one recruit slipped and cursed, she stopped beside him. "Language won't help you climb, recruit. Try effort." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was cold truth. By mid-morning, one man stumbled and fell flat in the mud, trembling. "I can't," he gasped. Knelt beside him. "You can, you just don't want to." He shook his head. "My legs are." She interrupted. "Your legs work fine, your will doesn't." She stood and turned to the others. "Drag him to the finish line." The recruits hesitated. "Now." 4 men grabbed their fallen teammate and carried him forward. Mud splattered their uniforms, soaking them to the bone. When they finally crossed the finish point, raised her hand. "Stop." No one moved. The rain had soaked everything. Breathing was ragged, eyes hollow. Then softly said, "Look around you. What you see is the point." They stared, mud, blood, exhaustion. "This is what happens when things go wrong," she said. "When you think you've hit your limit and the world doesn't care. That's when leadership is born, not in control, but in chaos." Her voice carried something more than command. It carried memory. The recruits listened, silent, unsure whether to feel inspired or unnerved. Later that day, they were dismissed early, a rare mercy. Most collapsed onto their bunks the second they returned, but Miller couldn't rest. He walked past the office that night, the door slightly open. Inside, he saw her sitting alone, staring at a photograph pinned to the wall. 3 soldiers in desert gear, dust-streaked and smiling. 2 of them were men. 1 was her. A red tag hung beneath it. Operation Red Veil classified. Before he could look closer, spoke without turning. "Curiosity is dangerous, Miller." He froze. "Sorry, Commander, I didn't mean to." "Sit down." He obeyed instantly. She took a slow breath. "Do you know why I'm hard on you?" "Because we're weak." "No," she said, eyes still on the photo. "Because weakness isn't your problem. Ignorance is. You think you know pain because you're tired. You don't." Miller hesitated, then asked softly, "What happened in that picture, ma'am?" She finally turned to him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a storm behind them. 2 didn't come back. That's what happens when preparation becomes pride. The room fell quiet. Miller nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am." Looked down at her hands, knuckles, faint burns along her wrist, and said quietly, "Pain teaches, but only if you survive it." When Miller left, he felt something different. Respect, yes, but also understanding. She wasn't just training them to be stronger. She was training them to live through the kind of moments that had broken her once. The next morning, the recruits showed up early. No one complained. No one questioned her methods. Because for the first time, they understood that Commander wasn't trying to build perfect soldiers. She was trying to build survivors. And beneath the iron exterior of a SEAL commander, there was something else, something raw and real. A leader who carried the ghosts of those who couldn't finish the mission. The recruits didn't know it yet, but soon, they'd face their own ghosts too. Rain still clung to the ground the next morning, but the recruits showed up early. No one waited for orders anymore, they simply prepared. Their bodies were sore, their faces worn, yet their eyes were sharper than ever. Commander stood before them, boots planted firm in the mud. "Today's schedule changed," she said, her tone crisp. "We're running a full-field operation drill. Expect the unexpected." They'd learned that meant one thing: hell was coming. By noon, they were knee-deep in tactical exercises. Live communication, field rescue, and simulated extraction. Watched quietly as they moved, evaluating not speed but synergy. For the first time, she saw something that made her proud. They weren't competing, they were cooperating. Miller took point, signaling directions while two recruits covered him. Another pair moved a wounded dummy to safety. But just as was about to call the drill successful, a deafening blast shook the air. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Sirens blared. Everyone froze. Instincts kicked in instantly. "DOWN," she barked. Smoke poured from the east wing of the maintenance building. The red emergency lights on the watchtower began flashing wildly. This wasn't part of the drill. His voice cut through the chaos. "Miller, take 3, secure the perimeter. Sanders, radio command and report possible explosion." Her movements were lightning fast, efficient, without panic. She ran toward the smoke, grabbing a fire extinguisher on the way. Flames licked from the building's side as she kicked open the door. Inside, 2 maintenance officers were coughing through thick smoke, dropped low, covering her mouth with her sleeve. "Can you walk?" "Barely, one's trapped under debris," one shouted. Didn't hesitate. She shoved aside flaming debris, ignoring the sparks that burned across her arms. Her strength seemed impossible, driven not by muscle, but by sheer will. The officers stumbled out, gasping. One turned back. "What about you, Commander?" She waved him on. "Go." Seconds later, she emerged with the second man slung over her shoulder, half dragging, half carrying him through the smoke. The recruits outside watched in awe as their commander burst from the haze, covered in soot, coughing, but alive. "Get him to Med Bay," she ordered. "Move." They obeyed without question. Miller sprinted ahead to clear the path. When the fire crew finally arrived, leaned against the truck, catching her breath. Her uniform was scorched, her hair damp with sweat and ash. Yet her eyes, those sharp, unwavering eyes, still burned with control. The base commander arrived minutes later, demanding a report. "What happened here?" "Fuel line rupture," answered. "Containment in progress, no fatalities." He scanned the scene, then looked at her, burn marks visible on her arms. "You should be in Med Bay too, Commander." Shook her head. "Later, my recruits need debriefing first." He started to argue, then saw the determination in her face and thought better of it. Later that evening, the recruits sat in the classroom, silent. Their faces were still streaked with grime, the smell of smoke lingering. Entered, bandaged but standing tall. "You saw today what happens when routine turns real," she said. "You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your training. And the only reason no one died is because you moved without waiting to be told." Her gaze swept across the room. "That's what leadership looks like, not mine, yours." Miller raised his hand. "Commander, when you ran into that building, weren't you scared?" Paused, then gave a faint, tired smile. "Fear's always there. The trick is to make it move slower than you do." The recruits chuckled softly, not out of humor but admiration. That night, as sat alone outside the barracks, she looked toward the stars barely visible through the smoky haze. Her burned arm throbbed beneath the bandage. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Red veil, maybe I got it right this time." Behind her, Miller quietly approached. "Ma'am." She didn't turn. "Something wrong, recruit?" "No, ma'am, just thank you for today." Didn't respond. She simply nodded once, eyes still fixed on the horizon. Because for her, The real test was never about drills or medals. It was about proving, to herself this time, that she could save everyone she led. And tonight, for the first time in years, that promise finally felt possible. The fire incident changed everything on base. Commander wasn't just the Iron Woman anymore. To the recruits, she had become something else, proof that leadership wasn't about shouting orders from safety, but walking through fire with your team, literally. Whispers spread through the barracks that night. "Did you see her arm?" one recruit murmured. "She didn't even flinch." "She could died in there," another said softly. And yet the next morning was back in uniform, her posture as straight as ever. Only the faint stiffness in her movements betrayed the pain she hid. "Formation," she barked. Her voice was steady but different, almost gentler. Miller noticed, so did everyone else. That afternoon, instead of another brutal drill, ordered the recruits into the training hall. Chairs were arranged in a circle, something they'd never seen before. "We're doing something new today," she said, arms crossed. "Every soldier carries weight, mistakes, regrets, fears. If you don't face them, they'll own you when it matters most. So today you'll talk." The room went silent. No one knew if she was serious. Then sat down among them. "I'll start." Every eye in the room turned to her. "I was 25, she began quietly. "First deployment overseas. Operation Red Veil." The recruits recognized the name. They'd seen that same operation tag in her office. "We were assigned to extract civilians trapped in a desert compound. Everything was planned perfectly, until it was." Her hands tightened slightly. "We split into two teams. Mine made it out, the other didn't." She paused, voice barely above a whisper. "Two men, brothers, my friends." The recruits didn't breathe. "I gave the all-clear too early," she said. "A drone strike hit minutes later. I told myself it wasn't my fault. But every night I see their faces and I know I hesitated. I believed the danger was gone when it was." Her words hit like a hammer. The silence afterward was heavy, raw. Finally Miller spoke. "Ma'am, you've saved lives since then, a lot of them." His eyes met his, and it still doesn't balance the scale. She looked around the circle. "That's why I'm hard on you, because war doesn't give do-overs. One mistake, one moment of comfort, and people die." For the first time, the recruits saw her not as untouchable, but as human. Then one by one, they began to share too. A recruit from Kentucky talked about losing his brother in a car crash he caused. Another admitted she joined to escape an abusive home. Miller confessed he enlisted because he didn't know what else he was good at. Each story cut deeper and listened, not as a commander, but as someone who understood pain's language. When the last recruit finished, stood. "That," she said softly, "is strength, not muscle, not rank, honesty." As the group dismissed, Miller lingered. "Commander." "Yes." He hesitated, then asked, "When you said you hesitated, what made you do it?" Looked down at her hands. "There was a little girl in that compound, looked just like my niece. I thought the danger was over. I couldn't risk the strike hitting her." He nodded slowly. "So you chose compassion." "I chose wrong," she replied. "Maybe," Miller said, "but compassion's the reason you ran into that fire yesterday." Stared at him, surprised. Then for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled, small, weary, but real. "Maybe you're learning something after all, recruit." Miller grinned faintly. "Guess I learned from the best." That night, as the recruits slept, stood outside under the pale glow of the security lights. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the barracks window, the dog tags around her neck gleaming softly. The names etched on them weren't just hers. There were three, hers and the two brothers she'd lost. She reached up, touching them lightly. "Still carrying you," she whispered, "but maybe not alone anymore." For the first time in years, the burden felt lighter. And as dawn crept over the horizon, Commander realized something she hadn't in a long time. She could finally breathe again. 3 weeks after the fire, the base finally began to feel steady again. The recruits were sharper, more unified, and the tension that once ruled their mornings had turned into something new: respect. But stability never lasts long in the military. That morning, as they were lining up for drills, a convoy of black SUVs rolled through the front gate, the kind with tinted windows and no insignias. Jaw tightened immediately. She knew that look. "Eyes forward," she ordered, but her voice was different, harder, more defensive. From the lead vehicle stepped Colonel Dawson, a man whose presence carried weight. He was older, decorated, and had once served with years ago. The two locked eyes briefly, the kind of glance that carried an entire history. "Commander," Dawson said, approaching. "Unexpected, I'm sure. We're conducting a high-level review of personnel backgrounds, training methods, and operational records." Saluted. "Sir, this unit is fully compliant, you'll find." He cut her off. "We'll see about that." The recruits exchanged uneasy looks. Dawson's team spread across the base, collecting files and speaking to officers. Then, halfway through the morning, was summoned to the command office. When she entered, Dawson was waiting with a thick folder marked classified Red Veil. Her stomach sank. "Your record's exemplary," he said flatly. "But there are discrepancies, reports of unauthorized engagement, civilian casualties during Operation Red Veil. You never disclosed the full count." His hands clenched behind her back. "Because it wasn't my place to. The file was sealed by Joint Command." "Yet you kept the tags," Dawson said quietly. "All three." For a moment her composure cracked. "You think I wear them as trophies," she snapped. "I wear them because I remember every mistake I made." The room fell silent. Outside, the recruits had gathered near the training yard, whispers spreading fast. "They're investigating the commander," someone said. "They think she caused the strike." Miller's chest tightened. He knew about Red Veil now and what it meant to her. An hour later, Dawson stepped out and called everyone to formation. "Until further notice," he announced, "Commander is under official review. Leadership is being transferred to Captain Briggs." Gasps rippled through the ranks. Stood at attention, face unreadable. "Understood, sir." As she turned to leave, Miller stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Sir, with respect, Commander saved this base 3 weeks ago. We follow her because she's the reason we're still standing." Dawson's glare was sharp. "Recruit, you're out of line." His voice cut in quickly. "Stand down, Miller." He obeyed, jaw tight, but the look on his face said everything: defiance, loyalty, and disbelief. That evening the base felt hollow without her voice echoing across the field. Training slowed. Even Briggs, the temporary replacement, couldn't command the same focus. Sat alone in her quarters, staring at the sealed report on her desk. She fought too many battles, lost too many friends, and now it was her own past trying to bury her. A knock sounded at the door. "Miller," she said. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "Ma'am, we all know this isn't right. If they're digging into Red Veil, maybe it's time to tell them the truth." His eyes were cold but weary. "The truth is complicated, Miller. People died. Civilians too. I called the strike late. My decision saved a child but cost others their lives." He shook his head. "You made a call no one else had the courage to. That's not guilt, that's leadership." She looked at him for a long moment, the wall between commander and soldier starting to crumble. "You don't understand what it means to live with ghosts." "Maybe not," he said, "but I know how to stand with the living. You taught us that." Her eyes softened. For a brief second, the weight on her shoulders seemed to ease. "Go get some rest, Miller," she said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." When he left, opened the folder one last time. Inside was a grainy photo, the aftermath of Red Veil, smoke, silence, and that same little girl clinging to her arm. Exhaled slowly. "If the truth's coming out," she whispered, "then it's going to come from me." Outside, the recruits gathered quietly near the barracks, their loyalty no longer in question. Because whatever tomorrow brought, they weren't following a rank anymore. They were following a leader who had already walked through fire and was about to face the flames again. The next morning, the base gathered under a sky streaked with silver clouds. Word had spread fast. A public hearing was being held in the main hall. Everyone knew what it meant. Commander would stand before the review board. The recruits filled the back rows, whispering nervously. Miller sat among them, fists clenched. He couldn't believe it. After everything she'd done, after saving lives, this was how it might end. When entered, silence fell instantly. She looked calm, composed, every inch the soldier she'd always been, though the faint bandages on her arms still showed beneath her sleeves. Colonel Dawson stood at the podium. "Commander," he began, "this hearing concerns your actions during Operation Red Veil, which resulted in civilian and combatant casualties. You are permitted to make a statement." Stepped forward, her boots echoing softly on the floor. 10 years ago, she began, voice steady, I led a SEAL unit into a conflict zone. Our mission was extraction, to save hostages caught between militia and drone fire. I made a call that went against direct orders. She paused, eyes distant. Command told me to retreat. I didn't. There was a child in that compound, unarmed, terrified. I delayed the strike by 3 minutes. A murmur rippled through the room. In those 3 minutes, she continued, we got the civilians out, but 2 of my men didn't make it. The drone hit before we could clear the area. Her jaw tightened. I've lived with that choice every day since, but if I had to make it again, I would. Because that child lived, and today, she's a medic serving in our field hospitals overseas. The recruit stared, stunned. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Commander, your file doesn't mention that. No, sir, she said calmly. Because it was classified, and because I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting her. For a long moment, the hall was silent. Then Dawson said quietly, You protocol. Yes, sir, replied, but I didn't defy my duty. From the back, Miller suddenly stood. Sir, permission to speak. Dawson frowned, but nodded, let him. Miller took a step forward, his voice shaking but firm. We've trained under Commander for months. We've seen her lead, bleed, and risk her life for us, just like she did that day. You can judge her record, but we've lived her truth. She doesn't run from danger, she runs toward it. More recruits stood beside him, then another, and another. Soon, the entire row of trainees was on their feet, standing silently behind their commander. Dawson looked across the room at the young soldiers who refused to back down, at the woman standing tall before them, and at the unspoken respect that filled the air. He sighed, closing the folder. Commander, he said finally, this board finds no grounds for disciplinary action. Your record will remain as it is, exemplary. Relief washed through the room. A few recruits even cheered before silenced them with a simple hand gesture. She turned back to Dawson. Permission to resume command, sir. He smiled faintly. Permission granted. When the meeting ended, the recruits surrounded her outside the hall. Miller grinned. Told you the truth would set things right. Smirked. Truth doesn't set you free, Miller. It just makes the cage bigger, but you can finally see the bars. They laughed quietly, but there was something deeper behind her words, wisdom earned through scars. That evening she gathered the recruits for one final session. No drills, no shouting, just her voice under the fading sunset. You've all changed, she said. You learned that leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about standing firm even when fear's screaming louder than orders. Her gaze softened. Someday, each of you will face your own red veil. You'll be scared, uncertain. But you'll remember this, courage isn't loud, it's quiet, it's steady, and it shows up when everyone else runs. Miller looked at her, then saluted. The others followed. Returned the salute, pride flickering in her eyes. Dismissed, she said softly. As they dispersed, She stood alone on the training field, the wind brushing against her uniform. She reached up and touched her dog tags, the 3 names clinking gently together. Her voice barely carried, but the words were clear. For them, for all of them. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky crimson, the same color as the veil she once walked through, and the same light she now carried forward. Commander, the woman they once underestimated, had finally proven that heroes don't wear perfection. They wear scars. And they keep walking anyway.